Retrogrades today. I have on a first-time guest, Christian Wagner, who most or all of you know. And it's funny that it's been X amount of years without Christian coming on the show. So I'm happy to have you on. We've recently buried hatchets over the summer. It was a hatchet-bearing summer, and
it was
happy to have you on. Yeah,
yeah, I'm happy to be here. I think that this is one of the most important things that we can actually do, to talk with one another about what we agree with, what we disagree with, have fun, contribute to each other's audiences. There was something that Anthony from Avoiding Babylon, he recently said to me that I thought was exactly on the nose, but he said that really the division in the church isn't between the libs and the trads, the Novus Ordo normies and the trads. It's not division in the churches. The divisions are actually basically between those of political opposition, which is very interesting. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that.
I'd love to.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. There's no person that I wouldn't, just talk to and have a conversation with on these sorts of issues to bear the hatchet.
Same. So yeah, same. And that's not even to silently damn with faint praise or to castigate, by some sort of aspersion. I mean, I'm sure you and I agree about most stuff when it comes down to it. But yeah, I would talk to someone even I guess if I have time, one of these kooks that makes 5-hour videos about me online with 76 views or whatever. I would in theory talk to those people if there was time. But certainly someone that I know I agree with a lot, particularly in terms of trajectory, where the church and our country, our republic needs to go, like yourself. Yeah, I'd love to. But it's funny with all the hatchet burying recently with Tucker and NJF, how a lot of folks will be like, well, it's good to bury the hatchet with him, with so-and-so and so-and-so, but not with the likes of this other guy. That's a bridge too far. Anyway, so of course I don't know. Yeah, there's no one I wouldn't talk to theoretically if there was enough time. Now, some people suffer in lack of interest or importance, but yeah, it's important. I think, and I agree with you that hatchet bearing is one of the most important things that can be done, because people need to see that Western civilization is, at some level, it's held together by peoples and blood and soil, but in other ways it is held together by ideas. And if you can't disagree with someone and still be civil, then you just like some sort of.
Yeah, I think something that I've realized a lot. I took a little break after my daughter was born, and it let me sit around and think a lot, because, I tried to take off of work, but I was still thinking about kind of the state in which we're in. And really what I found to be most important is actually how disconnected a lot of our internet online disagreements are between one another from the reality of things. I mean, the reality of things is that, your bishop probably has a heretical idea of religious liberty. Like, your bishop probably is an indifferentist. Not you specifically. I don't know anything about your bishop. And I'm not making any judgments on my bishop, but just in general, and the theologians teaching in the seminary supplying all of the seminarians for the priesthood are probably giving heretical notions around moral theology. And, the differences that we have, while they are real, interesting, and important, and people, they want to hear about them, really, they just pale in comparison to actually how bad things are. And I think that, at least for me, I have a lot of, crime rate central ideas that I like to put forward that I think are actually extremely helpful for moving forward in the church and moving forward in the sort of sanctification of the temporal realm as well. And to put tertiary issues on such a pedestal as you're not going to talk to somebody over it, that's just extremely gay. I don't know who decided that this was supposed to be, we're supposed to fight over these tertiary things and then not be able to talk with one another. It's extremely gay. So yeah, I'm totally glad to turn from acting gay to turn to acting normal. Totally glad to do that.
Yeah, it's like a Milo Yiannopoulos straightification of the church when guys start talking to each other.
Well, I don't know about Milo.
Well, because he believes correctly that you can come correct.
Yeah.
There are no puns involved in that. No, even with primary issues, primary or secondary issues, part of being civilized is literally talking about, hey, I'll talk about any issue. The way we used to believe conservatives believed in free speech, and then certain issues are less man than man and can't be talked about. You just talk about even primary issues, and if you find, I'm honestly not even sure where a lot of people disagree with me, because I'm a busy guy. I know some of the issues that you've some of the I think nits you've picked in the past, but I've maybe listened to your criticism more than others, 5-hour videos by just weird randos online. That's fine. I would talk to weird randos online if time permitted. And just, even if it's a primary issue or something I think is really quite important, we disagree here. Here's how and why. And here's the basis for the disagreement. And here's the, well, I think justified true belief.
For me, I think there's kind of two sort of dividing points. And I think these are two good ones. One is between orthodoxy and heterodoxy. So like, I know that you adhere to the dogmas of the church. I know that you are totally okay with saying the profession of faith. Like, you are not a heterodox person in my mind. So, when it comes to heretics, I will, if I find it to be helpful to, discuss with them their heretical filth and to debate them or whatever, sure, that's fine, I'll do that, but I'm not going to come onto it as a sort of grounds of we're buddy here. If you're a heretic, heretics are to be admonished. There's a saying from the fathers, heretics are to be admonished, not debated, but take that with a grain of salt. And then there's a second dividing point that I think a lot of people haven't identified yet, but I think this is going to be the important one, between action and inaction. So it's not just enough to have the right ideas as me. You also have to have the right end in the sort of like practical sphere. Like, what are we actually here for? Are we here for a debate club? Like, are we here to, chit chat? Are we here to have fun? Like, no, ultimately where I'm at, and where I totally believe you're at, is we want to change things. Like, we want to change things for the better. The reason that our voices are out here, the reason that we put the effort in here, is to spread ideas, and these ideas to lead to practical action to fix all of the issues that are out there. So like, those are the two dividing points. There are a lot of, Catholics in the online sphere that just aren't interested in action. They aren't interested in actually fixing things. And I'm not really interested in working with those people or talking to those people, because I think they're in it for the wrong reasons. And, lending my voice in support of them, it's not really going to help much.
Yeah, I think the occasion for us to start talking behind the scenes, reconciliation, whatever, was that we were both going to go on to a prominent YouTube show, and that ended up being postponed. The postponement that ends up looking more like a kissing cousin to a cancellation. And that show is action oriented in the sense that you're saying, and also in the sense that you're saying, we're not becoming Marxists, where it's like the point of philosophy is to change the world, not understand it. It's to understand it and then to change it. And like you say, a lot of Marxists, left Hegelians, have wanted to change without understanding the world first, metaphysically. And then a lot of Catholics, like you say, and this has been the kind of boomer passivity that we really do spurn, you and I and people between your age and mine, generally, understand it without changing it, and just like, maybe kind of speak nice and interview a lot of people and be friends with everyone. And that's not the point either. I would just offer this caveat to this proposition that I know we agree on. It's not always easy. It's not always singular, and it's not always easily expressed what the telos of having a discussion is. So it's like, repudiate heretics, don't debate them. It's like, well, I mean, on YouTube, that's going to look pretty similar. That's going to be my noggin and whichever heretic's noggin, usually on two different windows, or maybe we'll go to one location and do it there. And so we're in the same physical space, and we're going to be, civil, and we're going to start out talking. So it's a little bit like, you can't picture think your way to what's the difference between a debate or a buddy chat or a repudiation struggle session or whatever we're supposed to do to Protestants. So in the online space, a lot of times I'm a sort of come as you are guy. And so it's like, I'll have on anyone. I think I need to do more of this. My friend was telling me this the other day. Like, yeah, I can come to a debate reasonably cold and be friendly beforehand and go at the debate hard. And I know you can too. And then just, afterwards, maybe go get a bite to eat. I did it twice this summer with Jay Dyer. I can show up thinking I'm in a debate and not end up debating if I find out, like Tucker did with Nick J. Fuentes, that he agrees with him more than he thought he would privately. So you don't always know the end, and the end isn't even. It's something that we bear with us as a kind of virtual intent. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, here's the overall end, but generally it's the common good. And it is eudaimonia for as many as we can garner it in Christendom. And so talks like this end up being really profitable because there are a few things I want to talk to you about, and I'm not even sure. I sincerely don't really care insofar as it doesn't make me upset or not want to have you or others on the show. That I don't know what your response will be. I can guess it reasonably, but anyway, so we'll just proceed through some topics if that's cool with you. You said you wanted to.
Before we move on, I think another reflection that is important is that the reason that we're both talking with one another right now is because there's that primacy of action over personality or over pet issues, and just for everyone out there, and Tim, I'm sure you know exactly who does this, the various types of people who do this. Be careful for those people who will take pet issues, particular issues, who will take, non-essential topics and, destroy the efficacy of action, basically in order to push these pet topics. And
right,
there's a lot of different issues and a lot of different personalities who do this, but definitely be careful. That's going to be, I think, in the future, one of our most important standards of who to promote, who to work with, et cetera, is whether you're able to do that or not. Because there are people that, they have these secondary issues, these pet issues, and they will, so to speak, burn down the village just to rule over it. There's a lot of people like that.
It's a great point. Media. Well, and I'd say over the last year to two, a lot of the pro-life feminists have sort of been exposed as falling in this category. That's an important secondary issue. The life issue is really important, but it's still secondary. And there's so many feminists in the cause that I think what you said applies with equal force to them, and that it's really important. I hadn't thought to make that distinction, but it's a good one. And given that let's talk about something I know we agree on first. Yeah. It was a slightly different order, but I always make these shifts as I go. I know we agree on this because this was going to be the unifying theme for the big YouTube show with us and 20 others. Christian nationalism. This seems to be of one sort or another. Christian nationalism seems to be the thing that unites all the guys that actually want principle to conduce, to give way to action. Yeah. And the people that call themselves against, last thought, the people that say they oppose it, we're not necessarily talking about one scope of government, because I have a different scope of government than a lot of the guys calling themselves Christian nationalists. I call myself a Christian nationalist, even though I'm a subsidiarist, because of what you said. It's a grouping principle for people that want the principle, PLE, to conduce to action in a certain way that a lot of these pro-life feminists and normie Caths, trad normie Caths, Novus Ordo normie Caths just don't. They just want to be nice to everyone and keep talking to all of their maybe non-Catholic friends. And we actually want to group according to Christian nationalism.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is definitely one of the central dividing lines within and among Catholics is, are you a liberal or are you a no, I don't like using the word nationalist because I think that there are false forms of nationalism that are, condemned by the church and have been rejected. But basically, like, are you a liberal or are you a Catholic? And that's the question, really. When it comes to your political ideology, do you understand the effects of original sin on man? Like, do you understand that the people that our state needs to rule, that these are people who are fallen, they have the effects of original sin, and they have been called to the end of the beatific vision. Like, do you believe in the supernatural order? Like, that's a second question that's extremely important. And there's do you believe in the authority of the Catholic Church in temporal matters? Like, these are different questions that you actually need to be able to answer clearly if you're going to be involved in any sort of political endeavor. And a lot of the politically interested Catholics in the Catholic Inc. realm, if you kind of want to put it like that, a lot of them, they end up being fundamental. I like a lot of them, and I've done work with a lot of them, and they quote me sometimes, and I quote them sometimes. But fundamentally, they're liberals, and they have completely false foundational notions of what politics is, the end of politics, and what the state is supposed to do, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, absolutely. I think that is one of the dividing lines, that we are totally on the same side. And I think that one of the things that I always like to shout from the rooftops is how fallen man is, and how necessary divine revelation is, how necessary the authority of the Catholic Church is, how necessary the redeeming principle of grace is when it comes to politics, to where politics isn't this secular liberal thing. And honestly, I think that one has to be brainwashed into liberalism when it comes to a lot of these principles. Like, if you look around you fundamentally have to be retarded if you think that the average person is just going to be persuaded by argument to support good policy, or the fact that, with a completely liberal idea of civic involvement, that this is going to lead to the common good being sought, which is the end of the state. It's just these completely ridiculous notions have to be brainwashed. And if you kind of step out of that matrix and you begin to even understand in a little way how false these notions are, then I think that you're just on the right track. And I'm totally willing to work with anybody who have similar notions.
It's actually a shame that show didn't eventuate, because it was going to be a SmackDown. Yeah, there were good people on our side, and for as an episode of that show that it was, I guess we're on NDA for not even saying the name of the show. People can guess what it is though. The 20 of us. I happen to know through friends that there are going to be some really. It would have been the biggest SmackDown ever on that show, and we had a really reasonable 95% guess at who the victim would have been, so to speak. The Holocaustal victim. It would have been really good. So I'll say this to people that are listening now. There's I think the term in modern discourse that has the most equivocal uses, valid equivocal uses of any term I can think of besides the term politics or polis, is liberalism, which has like six completely valid differing equivocations. And when you're using the term now, you're saying the idea of separation of church and state as a desideratum.
Basically naturalism. It's just a political form of naturalism.
Correct. Yeah. So that's what we're saying. This is a bad thing. And that's really the ground. That was going to be the ground of the SmackDown if we had appeared on that show. And I'll just say, look, the separation of church and state is evil, insofar as state and church must not be separated. And in this great country, church and state wasn't to be separated, insofar as you can call a mostly Protestant demographic church. So there's an equivocal use of church as well as an equivocal usage of liberalism. But in this country, right, church and state were not supposed to be separated. And in most of the states, they weren't separated. Of course, I'm always going to favor, in a post-Pius XI world, I'm always going to accept and will require local government, right, which Pius tells us is a natural law principle. But we must have Christianity recognized as our official religion, our official faith, officially or unofficially. And then at individual state levels, it's supposed to be, which sect is your state? Well, are there more Baptists than not in Mississippi? Yeah, that's where I live. So unfortunately, there are a lot of Baptists here, and I accept that. But it should be an official establishment of baptism, or whatever it's called, baptistry here in Mississippi, and it's the same with all of the states, and it's a matter of local determination. So in that sense, I'm a Christian nationalist because I do reject liberalism, and it's an area, how big is the scope of proper governance, where reasonable minds can and do disagree. And Pius XI, who laid down the principle of subsidiarity, and Leo XIII, who really kind of gave us the idea in its inchoate form.
Yeah, I think that what you brought up right there, sorry to interrupt, but what you brought up right there on the differing forms of valid government, I think that's it's an extremely important principle that I think is lost on a lot of people. I think that a lot of individuals, and this is what I think is responsible actually for a lot of stagnation, and why NGF ends up becoming NJF, sorry. NJF ends up becoming such a breath of fresh air for a lot of people who are into Catholic political theology from a right-wing perspective, is there's been such a huge stagnation of basically like political dorks, might be the best way of putting it. Like monarchist LARPers, people who think the old regime, the old, families, that these are somehow going to be our saving help. And I think if the 20th century, especially the 20th century in Spain through its various revolutions, has proven anything to us, it is the fact that the old order is not here to save us. The old order is not going to be the principle. We need to be futurists. We need to build something from the ground up. Like that's where we need to go. Being a monarchist in the year 2025 is, I'm sorry, guys, I like a lot of you. A lot of you are cool. A lot of you are nice guys, but it's retarded. It's completely stupid. Like we're not getting,
guys, not a lot of them are cool, but I'm with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like
None of
them. Okay. They're not cool, but I like them. Okay.
I can like dorks. Yeah. No, I'm with you. Keep going. I like what you're saying.
I was just saying, I think that when it comes to Catholic political action, we have to be thinking action is something practical. Like action is for the sake of the end in which we acquire. And when it comes to those means, which don't have a necessary connection with the end, such as the various forms of political governance, we have to have conversations with one another. We have to battle out the ideas of which one of these systems is going to work the best. So, you might have somebody who maybe is much more of a constitutionalist and much more interested in, like legislative supremacy. Let's say you have basically like an old, like Buchanan type conservative, or you might have somebody like myself, and I think that NJF is of this mind, but who is much more heavy-handed when it comes to the executive and is much more centralized when it comes to the national government. Like that's kind of the way that I think, but I'm totally open to hearing other ways, because each one of these ideas has a non-necessary connection with the end. But what you can't do is you can't LARP about stupid ideas that are not going to achieve the end and pretend that they do for the sake of it. I like the edit with the Habsburgs in it. Okay, me too. But that's not. They're not here to help us. Okay, it's a stupid notion that this is what's going to help us politically. It's not.
Yeah, you are awaiting what you see to be dire, necessary, and what ultimately is unavailable help. So you're not going to be helped if you think that the Habsburgs are going to show up in 2025, or let's say 2028, America in the election and offer some aid that's needed. I would say that's great. I love that point, and I'm adding to it. This is strictly ad extra. Every form of government that's valid. Here's the timeless principle that's laid out more or less by the church, by St. Thomas, and he gets it from Aristotle, so it's doubly true. Any form of government that's valid will always be, if it's oriented toward the common good, it'll fall into one of these three categories, asterisk that. A common good form of rule by one. Okay, now LARPers are going to be like, there's monarchy. You're like, sit down, dork. You're 325 pounds and you have a mustache and just sit down. Yes, that's usually monarchy if it's good. It's usually something like tyranny if it's bad. Okay. Or type 2, it'll be the the common good oriented rule by few, generally known as a rule by aristoi or the aristocracy, and it'll become some sort of oligarchy if it's not oriented to the common good. And there are a lot of subclasses of communism. We ended up finding out is really a form of aristocracy. As any Stalinist will tell you, true Stalinist, honest Stalinist. And then there is a valid form, and this is where you get the LARPs really going. Of there is a common good oriented, centered rule by many, and that's called, whatever you want to call it. Republic is the good form, or the polity is another term for the good form. And there's a wicked form, and that wicked form is called democracy, which was another area we were just going to hammer that guy on if that thing had eventuated. We're talking like the FBI's listening and we're La Cosa Nostra on a phone call. The first thing or the second thing? The third thing. And the asterisk is that there is a fourth form that St. Thomas gives us that says some mix. And this is what was really good about what you were saying. You and maybe Nick Fuentes, Nick and I talk about this a lot behind the scenes. He's really a Hamiltonian. I'm really a hardcore Jeffersonian. So because St. Thomas says that we can have this mixture of government, and Leo XIII recognized it expressly in America, that it is St. Thomas's mix of the three good regimes, right? The rule by one, the rule by few, rule by many. That pertains to our three branches. The rule by one is the executive, the rule by few is the judiciary, the rule by many is the legislature. You can have different recipes, right, with different proportions of those three, and they still don't, as long as subsidiarity and the common good are being honored. Those are the two necessary ingredients. You have to have subsidiarity according to Pius the 11th, and you have to have the common good according to the whole Catholic political tradition. Then you can have a more top-heavy, executive-loving government with peppered in executive and judiciary the way you might like it, or Nick Fuentes might like it. You might have a more legislative model, whatever, particularly of the state legislature funded model or founded model, the way I'd like it. And then you become more of a Jeffersonian. But they all work, and they're all those three valid forms of government. The LARPers truly don't know how many valid forms of government there are, and what the measuring canon is for whether or not they fit what we actually must have, the sine qua nons for Catholics.
Yeah, I think that what a lot of people miss is like another conclusion we can draw from this. And this is something that Jean Doucet in his work Action, or I guess he would have said Action. But it's a good work on Catholic action, just sort of like the practical edges of it, of like, okay, we have all of these works on Catholic political theology, and we can read them and talk about them or whatever. But like, what's actually the sort of practical step-by-step model for going forward? And he makes a point. He's like, I read a lot of the revolutionary communists because they're the ones who do action the best. Like they're so I read Mao. I read a lot of the Russian communists as well, because they do action really well. I read the fasci. I read everybody. I read the anarchists, because what I understood, this is a point that he makes, like what I understood is that when it comes to practical action, those means, they can like be intrinsically evil. And obviously we don't want to use those intrinsically evil ends that a lot of these groups have used, but they could also be, completely benign. Like they could be used toward a good end, subordinated to a good end, or subordinated to a bad end. They're only evil per accident, not evil per se. Mm-hmm. So, we need to be, studying these various different forms and understanding what works and what doesn't work, and be willing to, on these non-essential points, we need to have those discussions and be able to, move forward likewise. But what's so important is there are those things which are only evil or good per accidents. There's also those things which are evil or good per se. By their very nature, they are either ordered towards a good end or they're ordered towards a bad end. And on those things, like, we need to only tolerate those choosing evil within our ranks. And this is what I have learned through a little bit of the political involvement I've had here and there, is that, you tolerate non-Catholics, or even, Catholics with wrong, fundamentally wrong political notions. You tolerate them. You never trust them. You work with them insofar as they are not harmful towards your end. But we do actually need to have a little bit more of a correct idea of kind of getting the contours between working with those who are non-Catholics and who still can be in a way useful towards our political ends. And then on the other hand, making sure we are not ourselves corrupted by their error. And this is, it does depend on how bad the situation is, how dire the situation is. Like, I don't, for example, Tucker Carlson's obviously a Protestant. I've heard him say things that are not in line with Catholic political teaching. But we are in such a dire situation in the United States that, I do not blame any Catholic for working with him, for supporting him, for listening to him. But if we were in, a Catholic state, back in the old days, obviously you wouldn't tolerate a lot of his errors. That would obviously be a bad decision. So, and these sorts of thoughts, these sorts of distinctions, these sorts of practical solutions, it takes a mind able to abstract. It takes a mind who is able to think in those terms, where a lot of the people involved in Catholic politics, they haven't really thought about foundational issues, and they don't really reflexively think about a lot of these things. They kind of just vomit up whatever they feel, whatever sort of appears to their eyes to be good, without any sort of deep and reflexive consideration of the problem, which is why so many Catholics are and I'm going to get in hot water for this, I just know it, why a lot of Catholics they say things like, oh, I agree with NJF on 99% of things, but he acted in an inappropriate way this 1%. He said things about this person or that person that was just out of line. And sure, I can agree to that, like the 1% of things out of line. But when we're in a sort of dire situation, that's sort of it's BS to point to those things as a way of excluding any sort of political union with another person. Admitting flaws is not an excuse to completely torch your country, to completely torch political action, to completely torch any future and possibility. Like that's I think a completely wrong-headed way of thinking. And if people think like that, you're just not really worth working with, because you're never going to do anything useful.
Agreed. And it's straining at gnats, which is the conceptual inverse of gilding lilies, right? You're being defeated by your victory when you're gilding lilies. You're being defeated by defeat when you're straining at gnats. And people do strain at gnats intentionally to not get it, to not be aligned with someone that's making a lot of practical sense. Where I don't have any problem with the way that Fuentes makes jokes or talks harshly. It's similar to my approach. I mean, if anything, we have, the main thing he and I are going to disagree about are, Jeffersonianism, Hamiltonianism. But I know what you're saying, and it is BS, and it's a cop-out. One thing he says, to maybe move this along, we can do another one soon, but one thing that Fuentes said that got him in trouble with a lot of Catholics recently was, people collect devotions like Pokemon cards or something. And I defended him. I said, look, this is a legitimate disagreement. There are legitimate different disagreements between faithful cradle Catholics, and they're different, the disagreements of procedure, I would say, and faithful converts. And I sometimes wonder if in our past disagreements, that's been maybe not the entire substance, but that's been the procedural basis for it. Like, he's like, look, for a cradle Catholic, there's still a fundamental difference when you're raised in the culture of Roman Catholicism. Anything that's not averse to a doctrine, you're like, well, if this is our American culture, take something like Halloween. I remember growing up in the South when I came to the South from California temporarily, and I first met like kids, Baptist kids that weren't allowed to trick or treat. I don't know. I don't know your philosophy on this, but I'm like, it's actually a Catholic thing. I didn't grow up doing it because it was Catholic. It's just trick or treating and Halloween is more a part of endemic to American culture than anything. But it turns out it is very Catholic. And I'm just glad. And I think this is where I tend to agree with Fuentes a lot. Because he's really at heart, he is what I am, a hater of LARPers, even though he's a deeply principled guy. I hate LARPers. It's like, this is our culture, you know, and people are like, well, don't you want to go spiriting or dress your kids up like saints? I'm like, no, because I'm an American who was raised at the end of the 20th century and is raising kids at the beginning of the 21st century. This is what we do. You know, we honor monsters. Like we go out, we get candy and we honor monsters, and it's absolutely not anathema to Catholicism. It's actually, you know, I did this whole show on how it's not. And a lot of modern, I think, faithful Catholics have been shaped by converts. You know, the only faithful Catholics in the 90s were guys like Scott Hahn, who were all converts. And that spilled over to now there are a lot of reverts who were raised in the church. So there's some natural points of departure that tend to arise between Protestants who always took their Protestantism seriously, realized their Protestantism was actually calling them to Catholicism, came into the faith, did a good job sort of holding Catholicism's feet to the floor in the 90s, where things were really coming apart in early 2000s. But now you have these very, very faithful, reverts or cradle Catholics who are like, well, we don't want to go too far with the LARPing. I think a lot of the LARPing comes from American Protestantism, and
I think a lot of the LARPing is not really understanding what Catholicism does when it comes to a person, and especially when it comes to a group of people. I think that a lot of Americans especially are so deracinated when it comes to the fact that, you know, I am an individual who is a part of a people group, and my people group, there's factors such as language, ethnic composition, the area in which we live, commonality of history. Like, these are certain material bonds which join together us as in a sort of American people, specifically as a white American. But there's also sort of a formal element to it as well. And the formal element comes in when it comes to those common cultural elements. And these cultural elements usually come in three forms. There are cultural elements which are averse to the Catholic faith. And when the Catholic faith comes into a culture, it destroys these. There are cultural elements which are somehow neutral. And when the Catholic faith comes in, it elevates these and purifies these. And then there's the good things, and Catholicism retains, and it actually, strengthens our devotion to those good elements within our culture. But for a lot of people, they don't have this sort of idea of their own background. They feel kind of orphaned when it comes to this background. So they feel a necessity. If I become a Catholic, then what I need to do is I need to abandon all of those elements that are normal and natural for me, you know, from these cultural elements. And I actually need to take up some sort of LARP from the 1950s, in the best forms, and in the worst forms from the 1200s. It's
right.
You know, you're not a 1200s medieval peasant, dummy. You're just not. Like, that's not the world you live in. And there are, you know, maybe ways in which it would be better for you to be a medieval peasant, but there's actually many, many ways in which it's good for you to be a contemporary American. And the very fact that a lot of these people want to be medieval peasants, that just spits in the face of the obligations that Catholics have to honor their father and mother, which expands to an honor of their people, an honor of their culture, of their ethnic group, of their nation, et cetera, et cetera. So this needs to this sort of inculturation. You know, this is a good form of inculturation. We hear a lot about inculturation in the church these days, but really inculturation, when properly done, is the antidote to LARPing. It completely destroys any notion of LARPing whatsoever. So yeah, I think that a lot of the LARPing that you see just ends up being a problem that a robust right-wing Catholicism can actually solve. And I think that's why a lot of the elements that are supposedly right-wing within the, you know, online tratosphere end up actually being profoundly anti-right-wing because of this, these sorts of how do I put it? These sorts of habituations that they end up building when they join the church and begin taking Catholicism seriously.
Agreed. Yeah, it's well said. Okay, well, so one of these things that what defined the nature of our association, such as it was I'm not exactly sure. I want to give you a chance to say where you were then, where you are now, was sex. And I think this is an issue that is LARPy, and it requires a close study of moral theology, which, people aren't equipped, people out there, generally speaking, aren't equipped to do and haven't done. I was having this discussion behind the scenes with Classical Theist, and he was helping me put together this list of all of the moral theologians that would straightforwardly scandalize most of the LARPy Catholics to read. And we came up with, in addition to like Ford and Kelly and some of the usual turn of the century ones, Escobar, Sanchez, Kenrick, McHugh, Collin, Merkelbach, Ballerini, Palmieri, Lemkuhl, Nolding, Tonqueray. That's one of the ones I'm always citing. Vermeer, Capello, Jenicott Salmons, Lanza, and Bucciarioni. And what he said is like, I was just shocked to read what they're saying about sex. And so I'm out here talking about, and it's not, no one really wants, unless you're like Christopher West, who's, known as a fruitcake.
Yeah. I can't be mean to Christopher West anymore.
No one listens.
That's one of my non-mean lists. Okay. That's one of the people I can't be mean to anymore.
Yeah, no, exactly. But no one wants it to be their main thing. Like Matt Fradd sort of had a platform that survived being the porn guy, the anti-porn guy, and that's everyone kind of instinctivly understands. I don't want sex to be my thing, so I don't talk about it a lot. But when I talk about it, it's going to be technical. And the good news, technically, is we don't have to LARP. So I don't know. I want to give you a chance to say where you were when you were critiquing me or whatever that was 3 years ago. And my friend Will Nolan too, where you are today on the same issues.
Yeah, I think that the main foundational thing that we need to put forward is that, and I think that I replied to one of your tweets where I clarified a few things. One, we both agree on the marital debt, like that, and that I think is one of the foundational points that we need to set forward, like right in the beginning. We both agree the marital debt exists. It ought to be paid. It's a matter of justice. We both agree that there are proper ends which can be sought in the marital use to where it's free from sin, both in the paying of the debt and in procreation. And I would tend towards also the request of the debt in order to avoid falling into mortal sin in sex. So like there are those like foundational points of agreement that really, I think, are the cornerstones of orthodoxy. Like if you can't affirm those points right there, like you are outside of the realm of orthodoxy when it comes to sexual issues, for sure. So specifically, I would say that there would be 2 points that I would want to be extremely careful on, kind of going beyond that. And the first point that I want to be
before you go further, Christian, can I add to your corpus of what you must concede in order to fall within the bounds of orthodoxy and not fall into heterodoxy? Because I would just I'll let you do this, but I would say you also must, for a Catholic in the 21st century, you must acknowledge, to be Orthodox, Casti Connubii, Humanae Vitae, Familiaris Consortio, 1, 2, 3. I'll say what I think the key lines are there. Catechism of Trent had codified, had basically prefigured the 3 aspects in Casti, Humanae Vitae, Familiaris Consortio. And then it all gets grouped into Gaudium et Spes. There are a couple really key lines. And then the modern catechism would be the 6th thing. Mm-hmm. So in Casti Connubii, remember the 1930 Stickler document, Catholic Stickler document, where they were weighing in at the end of the year, the theologians who put it together for the Pope, on what had happened earlier that year, Anglican Lambeth Conference. We are holding the line on no artificial contraception. So it's a stickler document. Mm-hmm. But by way of saying we're sticking here, we're not folding, it first introduces the 2 inseparable purposes of the conjugal act, the marital act. And those two purposes are prefigured in a strong way as procreation and union. So unitivity and procreativity. So Casti Connubii, I'm not sure if it's one of those lines. I'm sure it is, actually. I'm confident it is, rather. One of those lines that is like almost de fide. So there are two purposes to the act, two teloi, whether one's primary and one's secondary. There are two teloi that are not opposed, and they can be honored in different ways as long as it's non-contradictory to the other. Humanae Vitae is the definitive magisterial formulation of the threefold fonts, which is sex must be marital, procreative, unitive. Now here, LARPs will get off. Some weirdo did a video on me for like 5 hours. That's they start using terms like NFP. I don't even know what NFP is. I mean, like, obviously, I know dummy normies use it, dummy trads use it. They get into arguments. It's just a dumb expression. It's not even a real thing. Yeah. All you have to be doing because I mean, I'm a philosopher. I'm a metaphysician. Is honoring something materially and formally as you perform that act. And if you do so, then you are not contravening against nature. So as it concerns sex, the definitive magisterial formulation is, it is an inseparable two purposes of unitivity and procreativity, and the conditio sine qua non must be marital. And then John Paul II says this in 1981 in Familiaris Consortio, and he says some other fruity things in the Theology of the Body lectures that get grouped by fruity guys like Christopher West. So people think it's just JP2, but no, this comes ultimately from Scripture, from the Catechism of Trent. So you have to accept that there are two inseparable purposes, or else that are non-contradictory. And as long as
this is where things get kind of weird, because I'm sure you're familiar with this, but the audience might not be. Traditionally, there were usually like up until about the time of Sanchez, so Thomas Sanchez was 16th century, there were usually listed the three possible ends were basically, procreation, the debt, and then concupiscence. So concupiscence would be seeking, as your end in the marital debt, it would be seeking carnal pleasure. So this is affirmed by Blessed Innocent XI. He says, it's not without venial sin, et cetera, et cetera. But in that list, you probably caught that I didn't mention union, because union is really something that comes in a lot later. And I've been trying to wrap my head around it of like, okay, what exactly are we talking about when it comes to like the unitive end? Like what is that? Obviously, you're talking about the two spouses coming together and somehow strengthening their bond. But I think really what's super helpful here is to recognize that fundamentally union is the joining together of the wills of two individuals to some end. So union is it's inseparable to the end, because it's something which is subordinated to and a fruit of that end. So like the sort of ideas of Aristotelian friendship, you can kind of apply this to the marital use. Like, are you uniting around the end of pleasure? Like, are you simply uniting around the end of concupiscence? Like, this would be, that would be an act which is not ordered properly. Are you uniting around an end of virtue? So the paying of the debt, the destruction of concupiscence, et cetera, et cetera. Are you uniting around an end of procreation? Like, what is the end exactly that you're uniting around? Because there could be good union between the spouses, and there could be bad union between the spouses. The end of unitive, I've always found it to be weird, because it's a very it can be molded in a lot of ways depending on how you want to apply it.
Yeah, so if you look at the Catechism of Trent, unitivity is a neologism. I'll give you that started around Humanae Vitae. It was insinuated by Casti Connubii, but it arguably it is the lower secondary and it kind of collocates them. It includes mutual help, which is what's mentioned by the Catechism of Trent, and remedying concupiscence. So those two, you're helping each other mutually in affirmative ways and in negative ways to get to collect good things and avoid bad things. And I would say I think the LARPing misunderstanding is that because these are inseparable purposes and there are multiple teloses happening at once, it would be impossible. And I'll cite evidence for this in a second. It would be impossible for a husband and a wife, if let's say they're married in the church, they're a Catholic husband and wife, to get together and to have the marital act, to do it just for pleasure alone, right? As long as they're not, and this is the whole point, that all of this comes from Casti Connubii, which is about how good and how dignifying and noble sex is when you're not artificially contracepting. When you're not artificially contracepting, for one thing, it's always open to life. Your least likely day, this is where science and philosophy matter, your least likely day of your wife's cycle is like 4% possibility, and your most likely day is like 54%. So it's not 0 and 100% the way a lot of the trads talk about this. You get together, and it's just there are more likely days of fertilization and less likely days. There is no 0%. There is no 100%. Even if there's a 0% day, like a post-menopausal woman, the reason that this is still a noble deed to do is because there are these multiple inseparable ends that are always being honored at once. And normies or people out there that just consume YouTube content don't bother to distinguish between the metaphysics, which is to say the powers, the procreative powers are what cannot be blocked or contracepted. The procreative powers are always at play, even when a man has sex with his postmenopausal wife. Yeah. And that's the language. You're not allowed to block the powers of procreation. It doesn't mean that procreation has to even be your
contraception. Contraception is sinful fundamentally because it's a form of castration. It's a form of genital mutilation. Like it is actually because it is destroying the organs of generation. Like that's why contraception is wrong. And a lot of people don't understand this. They'll say stupid things like, "Oh, NFP is basically Catholic contraception," which is just ridiculous.
Yeah, I sincerely don't know exactly what NFP is. I hear a lot of Christopher West types talk about it, and I hear a lot of angry sort of became a trad yesterday, controvert it or whatever, or repudiate it online. But what would you even say NFP is?
Well, I mean, I would say that NFP is basically a method of reducing childbirth by selectively having intercourse on days in which conception is less likely, as opposed to the days in which it is more likely. Like, I think in a nutshell, it's kind of what it is.
But can it be reduced? Because I'm a Thomist moral philosopher, so everything reduces to action theory, right? So it has to reduce to an action. If something's wrong, it has to be an act that's wrong. It can be a mental act that's wrong. But so these people, because I had this weirdo made this five hour video on me, and he was saying I like NFP. I'm like, I don't even know what NFP is. All right, but he conceded the boundary condition that you're even allowed, it's licit to have sex with your postmenopausal wife. So I went through and I was saying, so you're telling me that it's a mortal sin to have sex on a day where it's somewhat less likely, 4% chance of fertilization, but it's not a mortal sin to have sex on a day when it's 0%, because he's right. It is an immortal sin when it's 0%, as long as you're not blocking the procreative powers. So I think people who aren't moral philosophers tend to get away from this as thinking about it as being predicated of acts. Morality, immorality being predicated of acts.
They just don't understand how precepts work. I've tried to explain it to people before. Usually the liberals who will say, well, you're allowing NFP, whatever that's supposed to mean. So why won't you allow me to castrate myself through getting, what the frick is, I can't even remember what it's called. I cringe. The basically the where you cut off the tubes and you don't all that gross stuff. Can't even remember the name. It's yucky.
It is gross.
Like, I'll try to explain it, but basically they don't understand what a precept is, because a precept can be positive or negative. Like, this is basic. a positive precept binds, and in certain situations, in which there is a sort of circumstances of necessity to it. So, there's a general precept to procreate. This general precept is not to every single individual, and it's not at all times. You're allowed to go to sleep. You don't have to be procreating 24/7 because you were commanded to procreate. This is like a very elementary error when people are considering precepts. Like, you have a precept to pray. That doesn't mean that you're not allowed to take a nap. You're not sinning by taking a nap, because the precept to pray does not bind at every single moment in which you're walking around. And this is the precept of procreations like this. And there's a negative precept, and a negative precept binds at all times and in all places. Like, you can't, the precept not to murder, this applies at all times. You can never murder. That's an easy sort of thing to understand. And there's something here to where you are bound by a negative precept not to alter one's organs of generation in order to render them impotent. That's what contraception is. So if somebody is out there having intercourse with their wife in a way that is properly subordinated to the ends, have the proper circumstances, etc., then what's the sin? I don't even know what the sin is supposed to be. Like, these individuals are not doing coitus interruptus. They're not contracepting by altering their genitals. Like, there's nothing here that would flag a sin. It's you have to consider the act as it is in itself, with its circumstances and intention. Like, no respectable moral philosopher would consider this act and say, oh, well, because actually this individual, because this individual actually doesn't want to have a ninth kid, then therefore this act is somehow identical to an act in which one is, castrating themselves and rendering themselves impotent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Even if materially it would be. Yeah. See what you think about this. I'm nodding hard. CCC number 2369 says this is an official codification of the unitive and procreative purposes. And again, this goes back to etiologically to Catechism of Trent and Cassi Canubi and Humanae Vitae. So unitive and procreative purposes, boom, are codified there. And then a couple paragraphs before, you have 2363, CCC 2363, saying here's the twofold end of marriage, the good of the spouses and of procreation. So good of the spouses is always loosely associated with unitivity, and unitivity is sort of a big catch net. It just means it's good for people because it brings them together. It's good for people because it avoids occasions of sin and concupiscence. And then 2362 says that the acts themselves, when they're failing, some flaw or some flaw has been cured, they are noble and honorable themselves. Mm-hmm. And therefore, what I would respond, well, no, let me read Gaudium et Spes before I make this thing and see what you think about it. Gaudium et Spes says, by its very nature, the institution of marriage is ordered to the procreation and education of offspring and to the good of the spouses. This love is uniquely expressed and perfected through the acts proper to marriage. So what I think a lot of people get twisted off on, and I was trying to tell whether you were, because we were talking about this after Will Nolan's recent tweet, is anytime a couple is having sex where a married couple, where the procreative act is not where the procreative powers of the act, the mutual generativity, is not blocked, then even if the couple might have come together and they're kind of just thinking about, oh, this will be fun to get frisky tonight, they can't help that it's conducive to a noble, and if you go by a noble and honorable catechetical end, if you go by Gaudium et Spes, noble and worthy end is the language there. Noble, honorable, noble, worthy. Whether or not their virtual intent is they're just kind of thinking of, hey, this will be fun. There's always the end of it's going to bring them closer together. It's going to make them closer. The church is very clear about this. It's a noble end for them to be together. It's a noble end that they're doing this act, which by its, preceptually, is open to the procreative powers, whether or not you're trying for a baby or you don't. It by itself has all of these separable joint and several nobilities to it, that it's open to the procreative powers, it makes them close together, and it avoids that. So even if they're feeling most animated by it's cold outside and it's going to be fun, they're being simultaneously, inseparably animated to act by these other purposes. That's all anybody who ever had sex with their spouse because they were in a frisky mood and they're just bored and this is a fun thing would say. And that's all they really have to say.
Well, I think that what we have to remember is that the good is integral in all of its aspects, and the evil is that which falls from even one aspect. So I don't think it's enough to ask the question of, are they intending against this end, and are they married? And is this completed in the proper mode? Because there are many different, there's the object of the act, the end of the act, and then the circumstances surrounding the act. And there's a lot of different ways in which this could fall forth from full integrity. And one of the ways in which I firmly hold, in which I think comes from Scripture, I think it comes from tradition. I think this is affirmed by Venerable Pius XII. This is affirmed by Blessed Innocent XI, is that, and I think we always need to be open to the possibility of the fact that when one is seeking pleasure alone, and I think that alone is very important, but pleasure alone in the marital act, that's not free from sin. And if something contains sin in it, then it is not going to strengthen that bond with another person. When one is uniting with another person over a good and noble end, that bond is strengthened and their bond with God is strengthened. But if somebody's uniting with another person over an end that is not completely good and noble, that's not going to be somehow conducive towards their relationship with each other and their relationship with God. Now, I think we can discuss and debate, and this is, I think the concern is beautifully brought forward by Venerable Pius XII in his address to midwives. He says, it is good and noble to seek the pleasure which is brought about in a properly ordered marital act, but we need to equally, alongside that positive affirmation of goodness, when it comes to the appetites in any sort of well-ordered act, because we're not Manichaeans. We don't say the appetites are necessarily bad. Along with that, we have to bring up, and he calls it the new hedonism. There's a certain hedonism that says that the maximalization of pleasure in a sort of luxurious way is what ought to be brought forward in and among married couples. And there's a sort of softness that I think comes with the habitual ordering towards pleasure, because obviously there's the way in which the marital debt causes one to the use of the marital debt avoid instances of sin. One ceases the burning. One does not get burnt when one comes together with his wife. But there are also instances of people who, they do not properly, have all of these ideas in mind, and this, it spills over. There are people who, it spills over. They are not actually trying to deal with those vices, those sexual vices they have. And they're approaching marriage and they're approaching their wife like they would approach, any other woman. They don't have those issues dealt with. So on the one hand, I absolutely affirm the marital debt. And I think that anybody who denies it is ridiculous. But I think that there is a tendency among many individuals to not be open to the possibility that there is instances of seeking pleasure alone that are common. And then also sort of alongside this, there are a lot of people who think that the only solution to sexual sin is the marital debt, which is not true at all, as you know.
That wasn't what Will was suggesting, but what interests me, and I wish we had more time for, was the former thing. And there's a conceptual difficulty that I don't think you're realizing or acknowledging with the idea of pleasure alone. You do anything for pleasure alone, and it is at least venially sinful, right? So no, sorry, you do anything or reasoning about taste and touch, two of the five senses, for the sake of pleasure alone, and it's at least venially sinful. So I was going to say pray, but there's limits because it's taste and touch. But what I would say is, given that it's orthodoxy and orthodox teaching of the church that the two purposes are inseparable, right? Stated by Casti Nubi, implied by Catechism of Trent, and then repeated in Gaudium et Spes. If the purposes of every sexual act that's open to life are procreative powers intact, and it's good for the spouses, and the goods are noble and worthy, then can you give me how could one conceivably, I know theoretically it's possible, it's just not practically possible to say, I'm going to do this noble act that's good in and of itself with my wife. It's good in and of itself when, in their graces that come from it naturally, anytime we get together and we're not contracepting. Even if the couple feels animated, and I don't know what the metric for it is, since we're talking about action, we have to give people a metric. How could you come together with your wife, do this noble act, you're not contracepting, and anyone claim that it was purely for pleasure when it's conducing to your good, when it's conducing to your mutual good? And if the purposes are inseparable, how would that even be possible?
Well, I mean, the purpose of an act is not the only aspect of a moral act.
No, of course not. There's
certain circumstances, and I could give a really silly example. If you are voyeuristically, having intercourse with your wife in public, that would be an act which is maybe you're not contracepting.
Of course,
I'm assuming, I don't know, but it's still like a silly example. But that's a circumstance of the act which is. It is necessarily sinful, and therefore it is somehow destroying. Evil in one of its causes destroys the whole act. Whereas to be good, it has to have everything.
Proper bracketing, though. Let's use the proper bracketing. It's not. It's rightly ordered in all the ways. That's the whole point. Because you seem when you're
responding. Sure. If you have an act
seem to want to be saying
ways, good end, good object, good circumstances, then it's a good act. And
those are the interior things those are the questions I don't want to beg. The petitio, I don't want to principio. I want to say, so all of the occasions and the material circumstances are right, and we're not contracepting. You're not it's not conducing to scandal with voyeurism. But this could be something to think about maybe for next time. But we're just judging. And of course, telos isn't the only consideration. I mean, something has four causes. And it's intelligible because of its formal aspect, not its final or its teleological aspect. But we're talking about the fact that the church has taught definitively that there are two inseparable teloses, purposes. Mm-hmm. So anytime you're doing the act without some sort of impediment, direct impedimentation to the act, like contraception, that's what makes it wrong. When you subvert it. But when you do the act for itself and you have these three fonts, I would say it's an overcomplication to say, well, so we're doing the act for the purposes of being open to the generative powers and procreative powers, and for the purpose of unitivity, which is for the good of the spouses. I've already guaranteed it's noble and worthy. Therefore, it's impossible at that point. Even if the agent might misjudge that they're doing it mainly for pleasure, that it's pleasure alone. There's at least some aspect that is because form is specified by intent, right? There's some aspect that is shaping the act, animating the act, that qualifies for both of the two purposes.
Mm-hmm. And I think I get a lot more what you're saying, but I do also think that I'm a mind who is synthetic. I want to take all of its different aspects and keep it together. Unfortunately, I have to go in a few minutes. I want to keep everything together, but I want to keep together the conciliar, briefly 20th, 21st century's statements on the unitive end, procreative end, their inseparability, the good of spouses, et cetera, et cetera. I want to keep that, but I also want to understand how to, interpret the statements of the popes on, seeking for pleasure alone. I want to understand why the discipline of the church, even in the Catechism of Trent, heavily recommended periods of abstinence, especially before the reception of Holy Communion, in order to dispose towards prayer. Like I want to bring all of this stuff in together, and I don't want to destroy any of it. I want it all, and I want to understand a framework for understanding this. Build a framework rather for understanding this. In light of the reality of concupiscence and the effects of original sin. The reality of the marital debt and the danger that comes with being in this world with original sin in relation to mortal sin in the sexual realm. I want to understand this in relation to the ascetical life. I want to understand this in relationship with the ends of grace and of perfection preached by our mystical theologians. So I think that it's a very, very complicated question that can't really get reduced to the moral judgment of, is this venially sinful or not venially sinful? There's all things are good, not all things are profitable sort of idea that might be going on here, where even if we wanted to agree to disagree on the practical question of whether, these acts of venial sin, how often they happen, whether they happen, that's ultimately going to be a question of the practical order. But what I'm more interested in is actually looking at the ends of the ascetical life and how that has played forth practically in the tradition of the church, which I think offers one of the sort of best expositions of the question.
Well, you're basically out of time. I wanted to bring you in for the locals. Where I think the only we're not going to be able to do that because you have your home out. But I think where we're disagreeing is whether it's even possible for all of the elements to line up for the three fonts, given what the church has taught, and to be doing a good act for in this case the wrong purposes. Of course, it's always possible to do give a liberal giving, liberal donative giving for the wrong reason, or a just act not as motivated by the perfectly just man. That we know. But given that we have like you said, that the 19th and 20th century church clarified this, and it does sound different from the private theologians that wrote on it before the golden era of moral theology. It does go against it, but we're not going to be able to explicate false logoi. And so I think that what's beautiful about the magisterium is not everything that every Catholic wise man has ever written is magisterialized. Mm-hmm. And there are times when we can't be like Hegelian. We can't include everything. Position negation does not equal synthesis. And I guess I'm on this reasonably straightforward matter, given that this is sort of the opiate for the masses, right? Copulation. People need a straightforward, action-oriented.
How would you interpret Pius XII address to midwives? Do you think he makes a good point when he talks about the hedonism that is being preached among the married? And how would you kind of seek practically to remedy that in ways that differ from how I have spoken? I don't really talk about this publicly that much anymore, like I used to. Because I think that, I don't think I really did much good when I talked about it 3 years ago or whatever. I read about it and I think about it a lot, but I don't really talk about it that much except over the last, 2 or 3 weeks or however long that stated. Yeah. But when it comes to Pius XII, get away from marital hedonism. We have 1 minute. What are your sort of thoughts? That's all that I'm trying to really follow here.
I think the grounding context is something really specific there, with whether or not technically there's a female equivalent of pollution, which is traditionally, anatomically, metaphysically a risk of the pollutive sin for men, because the formal part of the act of copulation is male O. Right? The male orgasm, the female orgasm has nothing to do with the formal part of the act, the generative formal part of the act. So I think Pius is saying that I can't exactly say why, other than it would be hedonistic to allow, if it's the passage that I'm recalling, it would be hedonistic to allow women to have a terminal act that is not connected directly or almost directly to the procreative part of the act. Otherwise I can't give a context. I can't square Pius saying it's bad to do good and noble and worthy things. You know, I mean, maybe whenever he gave that speech, people were just not cooking their kids' meals; they're just having sex with their spouses all the time. It doesn't make sense with the magisterium otherwise, unless it's that female pollution equivalent where the church doesn't want to allow.
You're talking about, losing certain duties on the basis of, an over attachment to pleasure. But I really have to go. I wish I could talk for another hour. But yeah, I just got to get going. It was awesome. I appreciate you having me on.
And you're right about the synthetic. What do these guys mean when they say this? These popes, who we guys like us respect a lot, where they seem to be going the other way, or even older thinkers. But yeah, I know you have to go, and I'll do a local stream on my own and talk about this some. But I really enjoyed having you, Christian. They can find you at your Walmart Thomist on Twitter, and you are Scholastic Answers on YouTube. Do you have 1 5-second parting shot?
No, I will let you have the last word. If anybody wants to find me those places. I have a Substack. It is Scholastic Answers. So that's where I do most of my writing, more intellectual stuff. My YouTube stuff, I try to, bring it down to your average man's level. But yeah, that's all that I have. Thank you for having me on. And I'll talk to all of you guys later.
Yeah. I'll have you back on. Thanks for coming on.